Reading. It's that habit that all successful people seem to have in common. It's said that the average CEO reads about one book per week. Warren Buffett is said to read over 500 pages every day. Bill Gates reads somewhere around 50 books a year. Mark Cuban says he reads more than 3 hours almost every single day. There's countless other examples just like theirs. And it shouldn't come as a surprise. There's books pretty much about any topic we can think of. If something is worth reading about, you can be certain that there's a book written on the topic. So much of the knowledge humanity has ever discovered has been written down for us to read and to learn from. However, there's a dark side to reading. Not everything is perfect. In this video, we'll be talking about all of the problems and downsides that reading has. But first, we're going to look at some of the good things that come from reading. For starters, books are a collection of the experience of all of those who came before us. They allow us to tap into the author's mind and see the world from their perspective. Just think about it. You have access to the minds of some of the greatest persons who have ever lived. Scientists, philosophers, businessmen, presidents, people who may no longer be with us but who have left behind their wisdom written down so that we may learn from them. Books are one of the best tools at our disposal to make progress faster on our goals. By reading, we can obtain new insights and knowledge that could have taken us years to learn if we had to discover it on our own. It enables us to acquire a lifetime's worth of experience in a tiny fraction of the time. If we're reading the right books, we can take massive shortcuts and reach our goals sooner. Not only will we be learning from the successes of those who came before us, but also from their failures. Reading about other people's setbacks will help us avoid making the same mistakes they made. Learning from their mistakes is almost as important as learning from their triumphs, since every time we do something the wrong way, we have to waste time doing it again. If we can do things correctly right from the start, we can make progress much faster. Books can also be incredibly uplifting. Seeing the hardships and challenges others have faced can motivate us to overcome our own adversity. It can shine a new light on our problems and help us realize that what we're going through isn't so bad. However, reading can be dangerous. If we're not careful, reading can have its downsides that may end up completely counteracting all of its advantages. For example, reading can turn into a way of procrastinating. We might believe that we're being productive by reading, but in reality what we might actually be doing is procrastinating. We can end up using reading as an excuse to not make progress on our goals. It's really easy to fall into this trap. Whenever I want to put off doing something, reading is always a good excuse. Just last week, when I should have been writing the script for last week's video, I decided to read for a bit longer than usual. I ended up spending the whole morning that day reading. If reading is distracting us from making progress on our goals, we have to take a step back and see if it's hurting us more than it's helping us. That's why I try to limit my reading to no more than 20 minutes in the morning, and then I don't allow myself to read anymore until I'm in bed ready to go to sleep. That way I'm not distracted throughout the day and I can actually get things done. Even if we're not procrastinating by reading, it doesn't mean we're being productive. I don't consider reading fiction books any different from watching TV. There's really not much of a difference between reading Harry Potter and watching the movies, and I doubt that anyone would consider watching a movie productive. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't read fiction, just be careful not to trick yourself into thinking you're being productive just because you're reading. I'm not a big fan of fiction books, but I do like reading biographies, and one could argue that it's not very productive either, but I'm aware of that and I try not to fall in the trap of thinking that it is. Another problem with reading is that we might end up reading the same thing over and over again. This isn't so much a problem with reading, but rather with what we choose to read. I remember when I read the book The Power of Habit for the first time. I liked it so much that the next 2 books I read were also about habits. It wasn't until I realized that I wasn't actually putting any of it into practice that I decided that maybe it was a better idea to just focus on what's explained in one of the books, and once I finished incorporating that into my life, I could move on to other books on the same topic if I found it necessary. This brings me to the next problem with reading. When you're reading to learn something, you need to be putting it into practice. Just reading about something isn't enough. If you're not putting into practice what you read, then you're only wasting your time. If we're only reading for entertainment purposes, then this isn't a problem. But when we're trying to learn, we have to be careful. Reading can be addictive, and finishing as many books as possible can end up turning into a goal itself. Again, if we're reading for entertainment, it's not a problem. But when we're reading to acquire knowledge, the goal in this case isn't finishing more books. It should be to learn something that we can actually use in our life. Now, I want to give you a few tips on how you can get more out of reading to try and counteract some of these problems. The first tip would be to take notes while you're reading. Some people like to highlight or underline parts of the books. I personally don't like messing up a good book like that. Instead, I have a daily journal that I write in every morning right after reading. When I find something interesting, I write it down in my journal. Another option I've seen other people use are these sticky notes that you can use as bookmarkers. That way you can have a small summary and you can find the page it's on really easy. Another thing that helps me retain a lot more of the books that I read is explaining it to someone else. I usually explain what I've read to my wife while we're walking our dog Milo. When you start putting what you've read in your own words, you have to think about it and understand it in order to explain it to someone else. This helps you remember more because it's no longer just what's in the book, but it's something that you've actually had to think about and explain. The last tip I have for you would be to look for at least one thing that you can put into practice every time you read, and then actually follow through and do it. It's the best way to make sure that you get value out of the books you read. In the end, what we want is to improve a bit each day, and unless we're doing something differently, we're not going to see any change. That was all for this video. Now, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea and stop reading now just because of this video. I just hope I got you to think a bit about the way in which you're reading and if you're using it as a way of procrastinating. If you enjoyed the video, it would really help me if you hit the like button. It only takes a moment of your time and it helps me out a lot. Also, let me know down in the comments what book you're currently reading and what's the first thing you're going to put into practice. Finally, I upload new videos every week, so make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so that you don't miss any of them. I'll see you all next week. Bye!